Welcome to Bears Over Beers. I'm Jeff Burkus, a writer for Windy City Gridiron, and I'm joined, as always, by EJ Snyder. EJ, I mean, some things happened in that last Bears game. I don't know if we'll talk about those, but we've got to talk about the Lions. We've got an amazing guest that's going to bring some really cool information. But how are you doing?
Better.
You've
We are
recovered?
more removed from Sunday. Yeah, it was not a pleasant experience, and we will talk about it a little bit. But we're going to talk about a forward future look. If you're a Bears fan, you've probably had quite enough of Sunday at this point during the week. But we're gonna move forward a little bit, and then we'll take a quick peek in the Wayback Machine. But we gotta have some beers before we do that. So I'll introduce our guest. We'll get to our beers, and then we're going to get right into it. But a friend of mine from Draft Twitter, if you want to call that an official club, guys who work, I have tremendous respect for. Today we have Lee Platte, known as Math Bomb on Twitter, creative of the Relative Athletic Score, commonly known as RAS, which is really common currency in draft circles these days. And he also happens to be a Lions fan, which is the intersection that brings him onto the show today. But Kent, how you doing?
Fantastic, man. Glad to be on.
Well, we're super glad to have you because it's always fun to talk to folks that are entrenched with other local teams. But again, we've got beverages, and you brought up Sunday, JB, so I think it's fair game. I'm still seeing red a little bit from Sunday, so I brought Ridgetop Red from Silver City Brewing right up in Paulsbo, Washington. Great beer. Love the beer. Not going to hold that against Matt Nagy, but I will hold everything else against him. What do you have?
Well, I was going to bring on a Founders, KBS or CBS or whatever, Canadian breakfast stout, but I decided on something a little different, and I have been playing with this bottle, so I'm going to show it to the screen for our viewers.
Oh.
So this is Mr. Black Cold Brew Coffee Liqueur, right? So they have a contest going on right now, so I'm trying to perfect a recipes that I'm going to submit. And in honor of Motor City Dan Campbell, who's shared his Starbucks order, which is like 2 venti tall whatever coffees with 2 espresso shots each, I figured I'd bring this on. So this is what it looks like, and this is what I'm working on. So I put 2 parts of the Mr. Black liqueur, 1 part of Michter's bourbon, and 1 part of Branca Menta, which is the mint version of Fernet Branca. And it gives, and then I put a little coffee creamer in it. We use an oat milk creamer in my house. That's why it's lighter colored. And I'm just trying to make like a nice coffee. It's a minty, refreshing iced coffee with a heck of a kick because that extra shot of bourbon. And you can't really taste the bourbon. It gives some of those notes in there. And then you get that mint and then the depth from the Branca Menta because of all of the aromatics that are involved in that. And then it's a really good coffee liqueur that's not super sweet. Like Kahlua is super sweet. This is not. And then that creamer gives it a little bit of creaminess, obviously, and a little bit of different mouthfeel. I've been playing with it. I've been tweaking it. It's a simple recipe, but I am standing by it. I think it's fantastic.
There's so many things you can do with that drink, man. I've got some recipes for you.
Sure.
I can send them to you afterwards. That's you're in for a treat if you're looking at different ways to enjoy that.
I am, and I was trying to just create a drink because they're starting a contest, I think, right now. And I thought, well, I'll throw something in. I like to mix up my own drinks and try to play with stuff, and we'll see if something happens. But I also had that bottle of Branca Menta that I've been playing with. I've been putting in a lot of like ginger type, ginger ale, ginger beer, and then trying to play with it that way. And that's been really good. And I've enjoyed that over the summer, but I had, this much left in the bottle. And I thought, I think I could put these 2 together and start to create something. And there's something here. This is a thing.
I like the mad science approach of all the things you drink, JB. Like, I think I would drink that because there's nothing in there that I don't like. And I've definitely played with cold brewed coffee liqueurs. We have a couple in the house. The Jameson's cold brew version, I've put in Irish coffees, which is fantastic. It's like coffee whiskey. So that I think I think I would drink that, which there are many things you bring on the show that I'm like, I would not drink that. So
you play that angle so much that I'm bringing on these like peanut butter, raspberry tart beers or something. And yes, occasionally I bring on a pastry stout because they're delicious, but it's not like I only drink that. There have been plenty of variety of beers that I brought on.
My wife, when we walk down the beer aisle, points at certain things and goes, "That's a JB beer." And I'm like, "You're right." So, I'm just saying,
if you're going to be known for something, I guess it could be worse things.
It's not bad.
So talk about being known for something. Kent, I love relative athletic score. I think it's great. I think it's brilliant. I think it's simple. And so that's why it's elegant, right? That's why it's so effective in communicating information. You have a very pleasing visual associated with it. Anybody that is not familiar with it, go check him out on Twitter, go check out his webpage. But I want to ask you this question to start. What do you feel as the developer of this? What do you feel is the best application to use this as people that use it and talk about it? And on the flip side, what's the one thing that when you see your work quoted or put on Twitter that you're like, don't use it that way?
Yeah, it's one of those things, man. Raz, when I started, it was all about doing things simply by finding an easy way to understand the testing metrics. That's why everything's on a 0 to 10 scale. That's why everything is just red, green, or yellow. It's a very simple 3-color system. Everything's meant to be outward facing so that the people that are looking at it can easily understand what it is. One of my favorite interactions that I get is when people are like, "Oh, I don't get it. It's confusing. What is it? Just like 0 to 10, da, da, da." It's like, yeah, you just figured it out in the tweet where you were complaining about not understanding it. You explained it. It's that simple. And the fact that you can just explain it within the character limit on Twitter. But the best way to apply it from a standard standpoint of when you're just looking at the metrics is when you're trying to project players and where they're going to be drafted. Not necessarily whether they're going to be good in the NFL. There's plenty of ways to use it for that also. But looking at draft position in general, Raz is really good for that. Guys who have really good testing metrics tend to go higher in the draft. Guys that don't tend to not. Even at positions where it doesn't really make all that much sense, like quarterback. Until Jameis Winston, there hadn't been a quarterback drafted in the first round that had a Raz below 5. And Jameis Winston wasn't that far below. Since then, Baker Mayfield was also below average, but before him, Jameis Winston wasn't drafted all that long ago. And until that point, teams just never took below average athletes at quarterback. There's only one running back that's been drafted in the first round since 1987, which is Mark Ingram, that had a below average score. There has never been a tight end drafted in the first round who had a below average score. And there's only a couple of second round tight ends that had a below average score. It's really good for finding correlations between NFL success and the players' testing. There's this mindset that people try to they talk themselves into, right? Higher score means higher draft pick means better player. And it's really backwards because you tend to look at it from a trend analysis standpoint as good player probably tested well rather than test well, probably good player. And that's a difficult mindset to get yourself into. One of the ways that I hate that it gets used, and people do because it's just how the numbers work. Everything sounds better, but I don't like player comps in general. I say that having just recently posted an actual compare page where you can compare guys side by side. But I don't like the concept of doing a comparison straight up for any player. I think I break everything down into traits. So from a Raz perspective, it's great to look at a guy and be like, yeah, he runs about the same speed as DK Metcalf, run a 4.33. That's great, but not everybody that runs a 4.33 is going to be DK Metcalf. Almost no one who runs a 4.33 is going to be Metcalf because they're not that big. They don't have those long arms. They don't have that type of explosiveness. Most guys that run that type of speed are Will Fuller. They're a smaller guy who tends to be a little bit more fragile and deal with injuries and stuff in the NFL. But smaller guys that they work on their speed, they work on that type of athletic trait. Those are what those guys usually run. But you get it every year where there's always a guy that tests poorly. And this is where I don't like where it gets used. a guy will test poorly, and then they'll immediately compare him to another successful player who tested poorly. The mistake there is thinking that poor metrics is a positive trait.
Right.
And you now comparing that guy to. Everybody wants to be the next Anquan Bolden. They want to find the next Jarvis Landry. Well, Jarvis Landry was injured at the time of his testing. He had a hamstring injury. He tested on it anyway. He tested better at his pro day. Still bad, but like normal bad, not worst in NFL history bad.
Not terror bad.
His score, I believe it's a .07 or something like that. Out of 10, out of 2,000 receivers, he was like bottom 10 or something like that. Just some absurd number. But it doesn't tend to be that way. And guys like Anquan Bolden didn't win as a player because he was fast or explosive. He won because when the ball was in the air, that was Anquan Bolden's football. And you had to beat Anquan Bolden for it. And most people just couldn't do that. And those types of comparisons don't work straight up.
Yeah.
They just don't work as a straight up comparison.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. I think it's an interesting thing that you've put together. And now that you've been doing it so long, and now you've gotten it out there enough that people are starting to use it, that they're starting to go back and compare and say like, well, this guy succeeded despite this, and it's like, you have to. So EJ is a film guy. He grinds film, but what you do combined with all the work that EJ does and people like EJ, that allows you to paint a better picture of what a prospect looks like, about what a class looks like. And so this is a really nice way to marry the measurables with the film. And so the fact that you two are talking and are combining on this, that's just going to make us be better as a fan community, understanding going into drafts. Absolutely. And you can't have one without the other. Right.
Mathematically speaking, I always love to point this out because it just makes me feel better. But like mathematically speaking, if you're going to go based on film or metrics, your numbers are better if you just go by the metrics. That doesn't mean that's the only approach you should take, and it's not a good approach. You should never just go by testing metrics because you're going to miss a lot of really good players. You're just going to miss out on because you're going to just ignore them because the numbers don't say I should like them. You have to be able to pay attention to the tape as well and be able to point those traits out on tape because the numbers don't mean anything if you don't know what that means on tape. We always like to talk about arm length and offensive linemen, and arm length matters. It just does. NFL teams won't draft a guy as high that doesn't have long arms. That's a fact. That's not an opinion. Whether or not it matters as much as people play it up, that's something that you can argue back and forth. There's plenty of examples of players who were really good who didn't have extremely long arms. Joe Thomas was fantastic and had a below average arm length for an offensive lineman. Clearly, he is a great player, and it didn't really matter that much to him. But you get guys like Orlando Brown, who had a historically terrible combine, and you probably overlook him if you're going straight by metrics. I didn't really care for his tape all that much, but I also didn't know exactly what I was supposed to be looking for on a guy like Orlando Brown. And that's a flaw, but every evaluator has something that they're missing, something they don't understand. That's the problem with evaluating tape. Sometimes you have internal biases that you have for different things. I learned a lot from Orlando Brown, mostly because he told us after he got drafted and started playing well. There was an interview with Orlando Brown where he talked about how he wins as a player. And I don't think that part gets talked about enough is that when you have a guy who doesn't test well and they are self-aware that that's a thing, right? Orlando Brown doesn't talk about himself like he's this super athlete, explosive guy who's super fast or anything. He talks about things he does well. He talks about how he understands how players are going to come at him. He knows that if he does a spin, I've got to be here. I've got to have myself set up this way. If he's going to go for a straight bull rush, I have to maintain my leverage in a certain way. I have to make sure that I get my hands on him right. He understands all those little nuances. And then he uses the traits he does have, his size and his arm length, to win in contested situations with NFL pass rushers. That stuff's really important, and it doesn't necessarily reflect in how a player tests. And I think partly that's why we don't see a heavy correlation with NFL centers and athletic testing, because a lot of what an NFL center does isn't about being fast. It isn't about being super explosive at the line. It's about being able to point out all the different blocking assignments immediately, understanding every play and everywhere everybody's supposed to be so that you can point that out to your quarterback and the coaches to make sure everybody's on the same level, and about raw strength because you got a nose tackle coming at you on a lot of plays. And that's only really tested with the bench. And bench is horribly impacted by arm length.
Right.
If it's just basic physics, it's just,
you got short arms. Cool.
Yep. Yeah,
Right.
great. Go put up 45 reps.
Right.
It sounds really good, but if you have a guy who has 35-inch arms and he puts up 20 reps is below average by most accounts for an offensive lineman. But if you got 35-inch arms and you do that, that's awesome. Great. Awesome showing, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's the combination of all those things is the way we all grow as evaluators. I don't care how we came in. I don't care where we end up, or what we move to or towards. It's like opening your arms to what other people know, what they see, what they know that you don't. And then the biggest thing for me over the years has been learning to filter noise, right? What matters, what is a thing that's a real thing that correlates, and what doesn't. And even with all of that, even with all that sort of collected learning, there's this third phase that we don't get a window into. And only in the last couple of years have I even gotten to peek through that door occasionally, which is what coaches say about them, what their family says about them, how they show up personally in interviews. Like, we don't get to see any of that. I talk about the thirds, right? Tape is 1/3 what they did. Their testing and measurables is another third. And the third is all that other stuff about what their high school coach said about their work ethic and, whether or not they piss people off. And we just don't get to see that. And it makes a huge difference, as does landing spot. Landing spots, maybe I got to divide it into quarters now because landing spot is so incredibly significant. But the more you can pull all these things together and then sort of sift and sort and say, nope, this really matters. This really matters. This, people say it matters, but based on experience, doesn't matter that much. When you start to be able to develop that filter, your evaluations get closer. Like nobody's great. 30 or 35% is pretty good hit rate. If you're anywhere near that or better, you're feeling pretty good about yourself, which is a weird success rate in just about any industry except for maybe baseball. So it's just about filtering out that noise and like athletic testing in breaking down which ones are noise and which ones absolutely aren't. When you can say, yeah, we've tested 1,500 people and nobody below this has ever done anything. Okay. Like that's a pretty good test. If somebody tests that way and there's not some extenuating circumstance, injury or something else, okay, I better really like that guy. And even so, I'm probably not smart too, because everything says maybe not. So it's the combination of factors. I love the piece that you provide because it is easy, it is comparable, it is understandable, and you can start to pull those trends. And you've done a lot more work with that over the last 3 or 4 years and sort of bringing up those where they rank in the number of players tested at their position over the last 10 years. That was a huge addition. And then I love the ability to switch positions. And a lot of people don't know that different positions have different thresholds and you can go up or down. And the classic one, well, maybe it's not classic. The one that really resonates with me is quarterback to tight end, right? I was one of those guys that said Logan Thomas should be a tight end because he's not that great at quarterback. And everybody said, oh, give him a chance. I was like, the NFL is not going to give him a chance. However, he would have tested as tight end 1 in about 2/3 of the categories that year. So it's like, do you want to be the very best tight end? And he was recruited to college as a tight end. He played tight end in high school. So it wasn't like, oh, go make him learn some position he's never tried before. But you flip in Logan Thomas's number at quarterback, they're this, you flip him in at tight end. It was like, oh, okay. And it's that kind of thing, that kind of filter on what you could do with talent that I think makes what you do so incredibly valuable.
I mean, it's fun. It's always fun to go look at what these guys are. You know, when the Packers drafted Rashawn Gary, one of the fun things we did that year was just put him at every position because he was such an absurd athlete.
Sure.
So we ran him at every position, including kicker, and I have like 35 kickers in the database that actually tested.
Yeah.
But it's fun to go look at that kind of stuff.
I want to know if Pat O'Donnell tested well because
good old mega punt.
Yeah, he's a strapping punter. That's
and a hell of a tackler. Like part of his highlight tape, it's not very often.
He had some hits.
That punters lay hits in college, and it shows up on their tape. And O'Donnell was one of those guys that laid people out, and it was like, oh, so he's not the little.
No, he's a big guy too.
Yeah,
I want to transition to the Lions, and you said like 33% success rate, and I was thinking, what would that be in football? And I was like, I don't know, maybe kicks over 60 yards.
Oh,
sorry.
Yeah.
That, I mean, honestly though, Justin Tucker, that was an amazing kick.
I got to jump back to Pat O'Donnell for a second because I don't have him in the database, but I do have his numbers. I just don't have it added.
Okay.
I will get that ran for you.
Awesome. We'll post it.
Yeah.
So obviously making a little bit of a joke at the Lions' expense because they lost on a heartbreaker on a 66-yard field goal, the longest field goal in NFL history, to the best field goal kicker in history. Justin Tucker's awesome. That had to sting, but we're going to get into this. Like, is that really the worst thing in the world for the Lions this year? Because maybe you do want to kind of stack the losses, but I want to start here. Caffeinated football guy, Dan Campbell. This hire was, I think, criticized by a lot of people. I think that he became kind of a joke pretty quick in terms of here's this Neanderthal type football guy, and you hired him to be the head coach. What are you doing? But he's incredibly entertaining. I've written about him in my 10 Thoughts column like 3 times already. Like I've only had the column for like 6 weeks because I find him fascinating and he gives amazing sound bites. So tell me from a Lions fan perspective, is this actually a good hire? Is what he's doing, bringing in a lot of these interesting position coaches? Is there something here?
So when he got hired and he came in and did his initial press conference, it was really important for Lions fans more than anybody else. A lot of the things that he said, he talked about how he wanted to build the roster, how he wanted to build the team back, how he wasn't going to sit here and tell us that it was going to be a quick turnaround or anything. All the stuff that we not necessarily wanted to hear, but stuff Lions fans really needed to hear. He talked about trying to make things fun again. Matt Patricia was a bad coach, but he was also a jerk. He was very rude to the media. He wasn't very good with fans. He made training camp uncomfortable a lot of times. He wasn't fun at all. And then when you have a bad product, it's just not enjoyable. There was a lot of great stuff from a football standpoint in his initial press conference too. He talked about the importance of mobility at the quarterback position, the types of quarterback that he wants to get at the NFL position. He talked about all the different positions on defense. He talked about the advantages of special teams and trying to keep that strong. And then he talked about eating kneecaps.
Yeah, biting kneecaps. Let's go.
That was it at that point.
Right.
Nothing else mattered from a national perspective. And it's frustrating at times as a Lions fan when you have this great press conference and then that moment. Now, I've been writing about football for over a decade now. So when that moment happened, I was like,
you knew.
You
instantly
that's it.
Yeah.
That's the only thing. Nothing else in this whole thing matters. As far as whether it's the right hire, it really looks a lot better than the numbers will tell you right now. Matt Patricia got blown out badly in his first opening against the New York Jets. Got destroyed, absolutely crushed. The team looked like it didn't know what it was doing. It was very disorganized. In his second year, he started to pull things together, and most of the Lions games were very close. They were leading in the fourth quarter of almost every game, and still lost almost every game. But they were leading. They were very close, and they were fighting. Dan Campbell seems to really inspire his players. His players seem very much behind him. You talk about the difference between a player's coach and a scheme coach, but his players seem to really fall behind him. I think having so many different position or former players on his staff is a really big boon. But I think it's a lot of it has more to do with communication. He communicates really well with his players, and so does Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator, and Anthony Lynn, our offensive coordinator. They've done a really good job of identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the personnel that they have, and they're starting to improve at how they use those strengths and weaknesses of those players. It's only a couple of games in, and the Lions have played way better than I think people expected them to. Against the Ravens, it's a little bit different because most of that was the Ravens shooting themselves in the foot over and over and over and over. Marquise Brown dropped 2 touchdowns on his own. It would have been a blowout if he hadn't have done that. But all the same, it shouldn't have came down to a 66-yard field goal. It really shouldn't. And the fact that it did is a testament to how much that team has put together. I wasn't very confident with how things started under even Jim Caldwell, who started off really hot in Detroit, because a lot of his flaws were still right on display. Jim Caldwell could never put a running game together. And when he first came out as the Lions, they won was 11 games, 12 games, whatever it was. And their run game was still atrocious. And they backed into the playoffs. And it's like, well, this is looking exactly how everything else he's done has looked. And then when Matt Patricia was hired, like I said, he got blown out badly in his opener, and the improvements never really started to stack. With Dan Campbell, we're starting out 0-3, but the team looks like it wants to get better. And it looks like they're making the right types of decisions for a team that is rebuilding the right way. They're just so far away from being good that it's going to be a rough ride for a while.
Yeah, and you mentioned that he led the press conference with that, and you and another noted Lions watcher, Jeff Risdon, said the same thing. Like, hey, here's a lot of good information. Like, he delivered a lot of salient football points that matter and that are correct and truthful. And then he said the kneecap thing. But he said before that, look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's a year, right? It's not a year. We're in a hole, and it's going to be more than a year. And that's impressive, but coach speak is always coach speak. Being Chicago fans, we are
in the middle of that.
Yeah. Immune to coach speak at this point. We know that it's garbage, at least coming out of our current front office and coaching staff. But the draft spoke to me, like the way they collected talent. When you look down at the end of the 3 days and the UDFA period, and you went, okay, like, they had a plan and they stuck to it. They didn't grab for the shiny thing on the top shelf. They said, we're going to go here. We're going to go by our board. We're going to go by value, which means they're going to stick to what Campbell said in the press conference. And that indicates an alignment between a coach and a GM, and hopefully a philosophy, which we're going to start to see now as it plays out on the field. But that's when teams have a chance, right? That's when front offices and coaching staffs are working in synergy. They're getting the players that fit in the scheme. Coaches understand what they want, how to get those players to perform better. And they came out with a really solid haul from the draft. And that's when I sat back and said, if we're talking about who had a really good draft, I realize it's not going to translate to a really good product on the field this year, but 2-3 years from now, we're going to look at that offensive line, which is young and tough and really skilled. We're going to look at that defensive line, which is, they made it very clear in their first 2 picks, like, we're going to play this on defense. It's like, all right. And you went and got the 2 best guys in the draft to do that. They've got a plan. They're working from the inside out. And, when they do get the quarterback that they want, that Campbell talked about in that opening press conference, they're going to put him behind one of the youngest and best lines at that point in the NFL. So those are ways to succeed. And the draft really sort of cemented to me, it's not just coach speak. They're going to follow this plan. So that was the most impressive part for me. And speaking of that, do you think the Lions should have taken on Jared Goff's contract in the trade for Matthew Stafford, or would it have made more sense to you to trade him elsewhere and just go cheaper this year, knowing that there was a gap year, that it was I'm not going to call it a throwaway year, but a growing year, building year, a year in which you didn't expect to be really good?
I wouldn't have taken on Goff's contract or Goff the player. I'm not a fan of his game. We talked about the ability to learn as an evaluator. Whenever I find out that I'm wrong about a player, I always try to go back and watch as much tape as I can on that player, find out what I did wrong. I mentioned Orlando Brown and all the stuff I learned from missing on Orlando Brown, because I didn't think he was going to do well, and he's awesome. It's things that I wasn't looking for, or things that I was looking at and misconstruing how that was looking on tape. Because it's always about projection, right? When I went back and watched Goff, I learned nothing. Back in 2018, because I wasn't very high on Goff. I used to give round grades on quarterbacks. I don't do that anymore, but I gave him a 3rd round grade. It would be a developmental quarterback grade for me now. I only have, you're either a franchise quarterback or you are not a franchise quarterback. And then I have some other classifications in that second one, but he wouldn't have been. A lot of things I didn't really care for on him. And then he came out in 2018, he did really well. So I went back and watched all of his college tape, watched everything he did in the pros, and I learned nothing. I felt very bad about having spent the time doing that. Because some guys just are who they are. Some guys just are, they're just, they work well in structure. They can't really do a whole lot else. And that's what Jared Goff is. And he's a very expensive version of that. The Lions wouldn't have gotten the trade that they got without taking on Jared Goff, unfortunately. And I think they're concentrating more on getting the picks and trying to build the team up. You saw it with they have one of the worst dead hit caps in the NFL for the salary cap, because they traded Stafford away. They took on all this extra money from Jared Goff. They restructured him and took on even more. They did all these different things to restructure their money. They're taking a huge cap hit, and they know that. But it also points out that this is a long rebuild. This is a guy that they're going to have here where they can trust him to do what they are trying to do while they're building up around him. It's not the approach I would have taken. I would have rather taken Justin Fields and built up around a player like Justin Fields. Instead, they took Penei Sewell, who's an awesome talent and hasn't allowed a sack yet. He's been doing really, really well. But it's not the pick I would have made. But I understand what they're doing. I understand the idea that they're doing. You mentioned coach speak. They talk up Goff a lot, and Brad Holmes, the Lions' current general manager, drafted Goff 1st overall. So as long as that's coach speak, I'm okay with it.
As long as they don't believe it.
Yeah.
No, you see how happy Sean McVay is right now, and you know
very happy
what Goff is. Like,
Yeah.
you know what he knew, because the piece I didn't know about that trade, and this is something I learned from one of our former guests, Jordan Rodriguez, was McVay had the strongest hand in that. Like, McVay was the guy that put that together, went to the owner, with the GM, but as the alpha in that scenario, and said, we need to do this. Here's why. Here's what I can't do. And I know I can't do because I've tried. We're not going to exceed this. I know it's a lot, but this is going to be the unlock. And it was solely his neck on the line. Like, everybody else had to say yes, but it was McVay's idea. He pushed it. Everybody else agreed with him. And you see how happy he is now, knowing that I couldn't get past this before, and now I get this. Right?
If you're working with more than 5 yards of field, you're opening up so many more things for the offense. And the downside for the Lions is that's what we got. We got
That's what we have for now. Yeah.
Yeah, the Rams are on a September to remember in the past now. I mean, this is a honeymoon period right now. It looks great for Stafford. I'm sure that's a little painful as a Lions fan, but maybe you can be happy that you have set this bird free, and he's
flying.
He's flying very high. And
I was a Stafford fan at Georgia, so I'm as much as it hurts the Lions, because every game he wins pushes that pick further and further down the draft chart. I love seeing Stafford succeed, and there's people that complain about rooting for a former player if it hurts the team. But Stafford's a very good player, always has been, and now he gets to show everybody that.
All right, I don't know. When Bears players leave, as long as they don't put on a green jersey, green and yellow jersey, I'm going to cheer for them. If they were good players and I liked them when they were in Chicago, I mean, there's examples of guys that left, and I'm like, yeah, whatever. But you cheer for the guy. I know you cheer for the laundry, but at some point you also cheer for the guy, and you cheer for these guys. So that makes a lot of sense. But EJ mentioned the good draft, and you've talked about Penei Sewell, who obviously is an incredible talent at left tackle. They kind of started him at right tackle. It wasn't really looking that good. And then because of an injury, they kicked him over to left. But I'm curious, in your opinion, this roster, I mean, I doubt you're going to say Quintez Cephas is a building block, but who are the building blocks on this Lions team right now?
So Penei Sewell, I mean, it's cliche to pick your recent first round pick, but I think the last couple of weeks he's kind of shown that he probably is that guy. He's going to be a franchise tackle. Whether he sticks at left tackle, which I'm in the camp that says he should stay there, or they move him back to right tackle and he eventually gets it over there. He's clearly ready for the NFL and ready to play there. He should be a fixture on that offensive line. Frank Ragnell, their center, is the best center in the NFL until somebody can prove to me he's not. He's a fantastic center. Unfortunately, he got hurt this last week. I don't know what his status is coming into the game, but that's probably something to watch. But he's amazing. Other than that, a lot of people would say Deandre Swift. I'm not quite as high on Deandre Swift. He's going to get 1 million touches this year. He's healthy now. He's been performing well, and he's not even healthy. And he is now healthy. Fair warning if he does go off this week. It helps that he has a quarterback that doesn't throw very far because that increases the opportunities for the running backs. But no running back really is a fixture player on any team. They just aren't. The Lions drafted Levi Onwuzurike and Alim McNeil on their defensive line this year, both in the second round. And that move of going after 2 defensive tackles, one that's an interior pass rusher in Onwuzurike and a nose tackle in Alim McNeil. You're trying to build a type of defensive line. It's not just getting the right players. It's trying to build, okay, we're going to have a huge athletic nose tackle. Those are very rare. I actually left our draft. I left work because I work covering the draft. I left to go celebrate with my Lions friends when Alim McNeil was taken. I was that excited. But they're trying to pick up because they want to play a certain type of defense, and they know they need those 2 types of interior players to be able to do that. And they went out and got those types of guys. I think if those 2 players work out, that's their fixture. That's their Pat and Kevin Williams, like the Vikings used to have back in the day. That's that type of interior disruption that they can get out of that team if those 2 guys work out. The rest of the defense is just really weak. They don't really have a lot of really good pieces there. We didn't get to see Ifeatu Melifonwu. He got hurt in his first real game of action. Jeff Okudah tore his Achilles, which is really unfortunate because he had a whole wasted year where they did no coaching for Jeff Okudah. And he started to improve, and then he got hurt, and it's one of the worst injuries that you can get. So it's really hard to put him in that same camp. But outside of those couple of people, the defense doesn't have a whole lot going for it. They do have Romeo Okwara that they re-signed to an extension. He is a very, very good player. I don't know if I would consider him a fixture player, even though he's a very good player. Kind of like Michael Brockers they brought in from the Rams. Brockers is a really good player. Is he a fixture on your defense that you can't do without and you can never replace and you just can't do anything without him? Not really. He's a really good player. But I don't think he's that fixture to build around. So a couple of guys on the offensive line, a couple of guys on the defensive line, there are worse ways to start.
Yeah, what do you think about Hawkinson? I'm interested.
I didn't mention Hawkinson, but I should have.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
He seems like he's that guy that, again, he's not gonna ascend. He's already ascended to a certain level. He's not gonna get to that sort of premium tier with Jared Goff. He could, like Jared Goff liked his tight ends and threw to them quite a bit in LA. Doesn't seem to be quite doing that. So I'm not sure he's gonna go off until, maybe they get that quarterback of the future, but he's right there. Like he's tickling that top 5-ish tight ends in the league status. And if he gets both a scheme and a player that are comfortable, I'm just going to say exploiting those matchups, because he can win just about anywhere, right? If they decide that he's going to get anywhere near a feature role that even approaches like what Travis Kelce does in Kansas City, he's gonna slam that top 5 just wide open. He's that talented.
Yeah, he's a second tier tight end, which sounds bad, but until you realize how big the gap is between that top tier, which is just Kelce, Waller, and Kittle, right? And then it's everybody else. The gap between that first tier and second tier is massive, and that second tier is full of a lot of really good players. Mark Andrews, TJ Hawkinson, guys like that are really, really good. but they are nowhere near that top tier. Hawkinson's in that second tier. It's going to be really tough, like you said, for him to get those opportunities because the Lions don't have any wide receivers that can exploit any other matchups, which means anywhere beyond the middle of the field, they're just covering Hawkinson. They're not paying a whole lot of attention to Quinton Cephas. They're not paying attention to kick returner Khalif Raymond, who's their current top receiver as a kick returner.
Yeah.
They're not paying attention to those guys because they don't offer the same level of threat. They don't offer the same level of after the catch ability. They're not as difficult to cover. So they're paying a lot of attention to Hawkinson on anything more than a couple of yards.
Yeah, and limiting explosive plays is such a big deal. I think a lot of fans undersell limiting explosive plays, and there's not that many guys on the Lions offense that are going to create explosive plays, and Hawkinson is one. He's a guy that can pick up yardage in chunks over 20, and so if you double him up, get a guy over the top, cap him off, keep it to one of those per game, the Lions aren't going to beat you. If you let him run free, he picks up 2 or 3 of those a game, the Lions might sneak up and beat you. So it's a pretty, I don't want to say easy, but it's a pretty tried and true strategy for opposing DCs to go. Make sure Hawk doesn't beat us over the top, right? Give him all the 5-yard catches he wants and tackle and run to the ball, classic defensive stuff. But don't let him get free behind anybody because he can. And that's really the only threat. And we're not super worried that Swift is going to do that more than once a game, in the current setup, because look, concentrate on those 2 guys and probably going to win the game.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. The offense runs through their run game, which is one way of saying they don't really have a great quarterback or receiving core. But they have a talented offensive line and they have a talented pair of backs that they can run out with who are both threats to catch out of the backfield. And one of the 2 is also a good blocker in the backfield in Jamal Williams. So they've got some team pieces that can help the offense churn, but it's not super difficult to scheme against that type of offense, unless they're really dominant like the Titans were with Derrick Henry.
Yeah, different level guy. I just wanted to say about Frank Ragnell that it is a shame that the Vikings didn't draft him because that is a Vikings player name.
Right?
And, I cannot believe they didn't run to the podium to get Frank Ragnell on their team. But
I know because the t-shirts would be epic.
He would sell. He would be the highest selling jersey. Dalvin Cook, no, it would be him. I'm telling you, it was just such a marketing opportunity missed by that front office. Rick Spielman, just such a missed opportunity. But we got to let you go here soon. You got to get back to crunching more numbers, but I want to go kind of speed round with you and, take what you want to answer these questions. But first one for you, just real simple. At the end of the year, what would you define as a successful 2021 Lions season?
17 starts for Penei Sewell and both Onwuzurike and McNeil making it through the season unscathed and showing the level of development they have over the first 3 games. And that's really it.
Yeah.
The win count ain't going to matter.
No, exactly. It does not matter. And that's why losing a game in that fashion at the end, it's like, well, it's not bad.
We kind of need to talk about the fact that the Lions have lost both times to the longest field goal that was the record broken and the longest field goal to the record set. That's just a little freaky.
It's part of the course as a Lions fan.
Yeah.
If there's some weird,
it's expected. We're Lions fans.
If there's some weird, absurd thing, I told people when he lined up for that kick, I wasn't watching with the sound on. I usually have the sound off when I'm watching games, but I wasn't trying to figure out, oh my God, they're actually going to win. I wasn't excited that the Lions could actually win it. I knew Justin Tuck was going to make that kick. He had to. I was trying to figure out what the yardage was when he made that kick because I didn't have the audio on. So it's like, oh, crap, I got to figure out what's this going to be because it's got to be a record. He's got to be past that 63 mark.
Yeah.
What about, all right, next one. Favorite Dan Campbell soundbite?
Whatever he does this week, he's going to come up with something new.
just reset.
He's just going to come up with some other.
He's just going to top himself. So I love that answer. That's a great answer.
Well, he's leaned into it a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, you saw what right after he had the whole kneecaps thing, he comes out with a racing helmet on because he was the helping out with the races and stuff. And it's like, he's ready to go. He knows what he's doing.
I gotta tell you, I hope that they do Hard Knocks next year.
Oh God, I hope so.
I want it so bad.
I have never wanted it for the Lions before, but I think that would be a riot.
Yeah,
I think it'd be great entertainment.
I'm in.
Like, that would be great entertainment because I think it would show some of what we were all just talking about, which is, yeah, you're going to get all the hijinks and that's fine, but that's like 10%. You're going to get that this is somebody that is well-rooted in positional developmental football who's building a team, and you're going to get to see that. It's going to be almost impossible to ignore with the way they do Hard Knocks, come away and not go, should we be worrying about the Lions? And the answer is, if you watch last year's draft and they do that again, and they continue, like you said, as they have in the early going, yeah, you should. Like, the marker's out there, but it's coming. So,
that's the hope.
Absolutely. I think that's like, you pull them in, you pull viewers in because of this like crazy head coach, and then all of a sudden
coffee.
It's like, you show the like Starbucks routine. That's like episode 1. But all right, I've always been curious about this because as a Bears fan, you're taught that your favorite team is the Bears and your second favorite team is whoever is playing the Green Bay Packers that week. And so I'm curious, from like, I like to ask Vikings fans this question and Lions fans this question, is like, who is your most hated division rival?
I hate to say it because of where I'm at, but it's got to be the Bears for me. As far as like on the field, I hate playing the Packers. We hate playing the Packers. They always get the best calls. You mentioned the kicks. We also had the longest. We also had the longest Hail Mary.
With that phenomenon.
We also had the Lions had the longest Hail Mary completed, which was Aaron Rodgers a couple of years back, where the play before that, he had a face mask call against the Lions, and it was just him faking it. The guy, he didn't even touch his face mask. But Aaron Rodgers did that whole jerk with his neck, and he gets that call, and it's Aaron Rodgers. He gets that call, But I've had a very unique relationship with Packers fans over the last couple of years because Brian Gutekunst is very, very into analytics from an athletic standpoint. And we always joke about it because the idea is that he either uses my system or his system is so close to it that it's impossible to distinguish between him, because he picks high-res guys all the time. Every one of his players that he picks is some superb, ridiculous athlete. And the couple of times he hasn't, they've been bad picks. They cut a third-round tight end just recently and never draft an unathletic tight end. Just don't do it. But they did. They had a private workout with him, and they liked his numbers, so they brought him in, and he didn't do anything for him, and they cut him. But it's the Packers fans tend to like my metrics, and I had a lot of interactions with them over the season. Bears fans, we've always had that love-hate relationship, and part of it is just that Lions have stunk a lot of times, and the Bears have also stunk a lot of times. So we've went back and forth. We've got steamrolled by the Vikings and the Packers for a long time. But the Bears and Lions fans, we've both been up and down. And whenever you have that type of dynamic and you get to enjoy the wins and you get to hate the losses and you get to pile them up one way and the other, I think that leads to a better rivalry when it's not one-sided.
Well, the last decade, they split 10 games, 10 games. There were long streaks. Bears in the early part of the 2010s, I guess, and then you guys had the longest streak, and then the Bears came charging back to like finish 10-10. So I will say that the all-time series is incredibly lopsided, Kent. I'm not going to let you come on the Bears over Beers and make it seem like this is a 50-50 split. The all-time split is not pretty for your perspective.
I'm not that old. I don't get to celebrate. I don't get to celebrate the Lions championship wins from the 50s. So I don't have to worry. I don't have to worry about the Bears
celebrate Bears championship wins from 40s, though. So,
yeah.
All right, next one. That's yours, EJ.
I'll most consistent college football strength and conditioning staff. Who gets the most out of their players in regards to testing in your eyes?
It's Penn State. Easily. Yep. Easily Penn State. Now, because it's such a very obvious conclusion, I mean, that's a little unfair to just say, yeah, obviously it's Penn State, and that's not fun. So BYU is another one that doesn't get a lot of credit. Brigham Young has had a great strength and conditioning program for years, and they tend to churn out a lot of really good athletes coming out of that program every year. It's not as high profile as Penn State, even though they look damn near the same, and I always get their players confused because of that.
I love it when people admit that,
It
because
is, man.
everybody that I know that's in this game, everybody that I know that watches college football or has an interest in the draft has a couple of teams. Like, I've had this conversation directly with multiple people. The most high profile one's probably Danny Kelly, and Danny lives locally and pretty locally, and we go back and forth. And I was like, Danny, who are your two teams that you just cannot tell apart or that you always screw up? And everybody has those teams, so I'm glad to hear you. I don't struggle with BYU, Penn State, but I have my very own struggles, and so does everybody else. Everybody will admit
everybody. So that's another good one. And then Ferris State is not a name that you would normally hear associated with that, but Ferris State has had a really good record in terms of churning out really good athletes. You don't get a lot of guys going to the combine. It's mostly at their pro day, and I know people like to discount pro day numbers. But pro day numbers are not as far apart in general as people like to make it out to be. And Ferris State's turned out a whole bunch of really good athletes.
They had the guy, the defensive tackle plays for the Bills, right?
Zimmer, I think his name was.
Yeah.
They had the ridiculous testing. They made him a fullback for a little
monster.
while. Justin Zimmer.
And he's still on their roster. That was a guy that was like, okay, again. And it's interesting you bring up BYU, because BYU may not have the sort of overall success that Penn State has, but if you look at the categories that matter for the players at their position, relative to position, they do really well, especially their defensive tackles, right? Those guys are stout, right? Their linebackers can run. Like, it's nuanced to position, which I think is really, really valuable. So. And then JB, you got the last one.
And we talked before we started recording, and you said you haven't been drinking a ton of beer lately, but I love Michigan beer because they do stouts really well. And so I was curious to ask a Michigander what you felt the best Michigan brewery was.
Yeah, and I don't have a really good answer for you, just because I don't drink beer anymore. I used to quite a bit, and then I stopped and just kind of lost the taste for it. So I don't really drink beer anymore. But Michigan has such a storied history with their brewing. It's really hard to lose when you go out and drink some Michigan beer. You don't get a lot of bad beer. I lived in Texas for some amount of time. I lived in Florida. I've lived all over the country, and the eastern part of the country. But it's amazing to me how consistent Michigan beer is in general. When I lived in Texas, I had some really good beer, and I also had some of the worst garbage beer I've had in my life. I bought a 24 case one time down in Texas, and I drank part of one, and it was so bad. It was so bad that I couldn't finish the first beer, and it must have just been me not knowing, because I just put the case outside. I was like, somebody's going to pick it up and drink it.
And no one took it.
There's going to be a homeless guy who comes by and he's like, oh, free beer. No,
free beer.
It sat out there for like 8
They
days.
knew. They'd tried that free beer before. I love that story. That's amazing.
But you don't get that in Michigan. Michigan, everything's at least okay.
Yeah. And I would say the Austin brewing scene, because that Austin is largely my experience in Texas, a little bit DFW, but mostly Austin. The Austin brewing scene is awesome. But yeah, there are those like wander outside the envelope at your own risk. And I'm sorry you had to. But where can folks find your stuff, Kent? Go ahead and plug your work, your website, everything that people need to know.
Yeah, you can find me, like you mentioned before, I'm on Twitter at MathBomb. I'm always accessible on Twitter. I love interacting with fans and talking football and looking at different things or finding different trends. I also have my website at ras.football. Very easy to find, easy to remember name. You can actually go there and look up any player from the last 36 years, from 1987 all the way to 2021. If I have their metrics, they're probably on there, except for Pat O'Donnell. Got to add his.
We will retweet that.
And I'm also over at Pro Football Network. I do applications development for Pro Football Network. You're not going to recognize that most of the stuff that I do is there, but I do a lot of stuff that's pretty visual there. But the biggest thing that I am is I'm in charge of the mock draft simulator at Pro Football Network. So if you go to profootballnetwork.com/mock draft, you can try out a mock draft. We update it every week. I'm actually supposed to be updating it today. We update our player rankings and all that fun stuff. We cover football college football every single week and talk about it every single week. And we make those rankings updated to try to keep up on everything. Another fun thing that I love to talk about on Twitter, if you want to hit me up there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of that extremely busy schedule to come on, talk a little Lions with us, have some fun, tolerate our more humorous questions, but we'd love to have you on again. Thanks so much. And I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, man, I had a blast, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Talk to you later.
Thanks, Kent. All right, EJ, we're back. Awesome guest. Thank you for lining that up. That was so cool to talk about it because I really respect people that grind the tape. And then as a guy that like kind of leans towards stats, I'm kind of more like Kent, right? Like where I want to take the numbers and crunch them and visualize them, but I don't get it as into the draft, obviously, as you guys do. And so when I found his work, I was like, here it is. Here's the cheat code for me.
Here's my in.
You're right. So that I can like look at these guys and be like, well, yeah, look at his scores. Like this guy's testing off the charts, or ooh, this I'm not really a big fan of drafting an unathletic tight end, right? Those are things that but like here's a cheat sheet. Right. So Kent's stuff is incredibly valuable. And that was really cool for him to come on as a Lions fan and just a guy that knows football, talks about football a lot. So really appreciate him taking the time. And we took way more of his time than we said we would, but like cool of him to stick that out.
Super great.
That was great. But we have to talk about the other side of this, which is the Chicago Bears, who are currently in a bit of an existential crisis right now because of what happened last week. And obviously we've talked about that a lot, but it is going to be a recurring theme with Matt Nagy and what's happening right now with him. And so I went out and I bought tickets to this game a couple weeks ago because I was so sure that Justin Fields was going to be on the field in week 4. Which
I'd forgotten about that.
Like it's still going to happen, right? Like I know. So my best friend and I are going to this. We're making it a thing. We're gonna do it. Justin Fields. I'm putting it out in the universe. It's still gonna be Justin Fields starting. We are gonna have a good time. We're gonna cheer for Justin Fields. We're gonna cheer for the players. We're gonna be there for this team. But we have to talk about this. What Matt Nagy has to do here to bounce back. I'm not sure how possible it is for him to redeem himself this week because everybody came after him. Everybody. Yeah. National media guys, like because the spotlight was shown because Justin Fields got the start and everybody dove into this tape and everybody exposed the issues that Matt Nagy had in calling this offense.
Yeah. And if there's a silver lining, which it's hard to pull out of a loss like that, it's hard to pull out, your top round pick getting the snot beat out of him, the offensive line not looking cohesive. Like that's the nicest way I can say that. The receivers not separating. There's plenty of blame to go around, but you and I have talked about Nagy's limitations as a play caller, not necessarily a play designer and not a head coach. Those are 3 different roles. And I think as a play designer, he could be okay. As a head coach, I actually think he's really good, and I'm not opposed to him keeping that post. Play caller, on the other hand, which is where we've given him the lowest marks and the most, I would say, warranted friction, he can't touch it again. You're talking about resurrection. You're talking about whether or not he can, pull this out of the fire. The answer is he cannot. It's so bad and has been so bad. Like the silver lining is Justin Fields' star is bright enough that everybody peaked, right? Everybody looked in on a bad team and went, whoa, that's not only bad, that's words like negligent, obstinate, clueless. These are all words that have been applied to Nagy's game plan, and they're not wrong. Like, I think those are fair assessments. A lot of times it's pile on season and people just want to pile on for clicks or ratings or whatever. It's not unwarranted. What Matt Nagy did was professionally, from a professional standpoint, being a professional head coach and an offensive coordinator, horrible, like abjectly by every measure, horrible, not enough. It's not like he came up with a great plan and the players didn't execute. He came up with a terrible plan and the players didn't execute. So you got what you got, but now you have a very intense spotlight on Nagy and this entire situation. and you have what I called last night on Bootleg the most valuable asset in Chicago sports, and people are vested in how he gets treated. And if it continues like this, it's not going to go well for Matt Nagy. He's going to lose that battle, that balance really, really quickly if he already hasn't. So what he needs to do is give up play calling. And from what we know about Matt Nagy, he's too stubborn to do it. So it's a rock and a hard place. And I don't think there's a good way out. And the ending's going to be messy.
Yeah, we've talked about this for a while. This is not the first time we've talked about it. We had a whole show last year talking about head coaching candidates because we were so sure that this leadership group was going to get swept out. But there were times in that game Sunday where there's all these procedure issues. They're not using enough pre-snap motion, so they're not following the trends of the league. He's not really picking up on any sort of analytics that a lot of other coaches are, right? Like he had 4th and 1 inside the 5-yard line on the road as a heavy underdog, trailing, and he kicked a field goal. Like, you don't do that. Like that is not what this league is in 2021. This league, sure, if you were coaching in the 1980s, no one would have questioned that, but that's not where it is right now. And so there's just not a lot of things that it feels like he's not cutting edge, which clearly he's not even hitting average. And
not even close.
Not
That's
even
the
close.
piece. Is
not
all
even
these
close.
Nagy defenders are like, oh well, and you're like, no, objectively,
right.
From a numbers perspective, he's not, and he's not even close. Like, you can say benefit of the doubt and injuries and a lot of things that aren't in the head coach's control. Over time, 50 plus games now, he's not even close to average. He's well below.
I threw up a very simple graph for my stats article this week. I basically made a 2x2 matrix, which is my favorite thing to do because it's simple and it helps just show something very basic. And all I did was I put the dividing lines at the average game of passing, which is 240 yards from 2020 league-wide data, 240-yard passing game and a 120-yard rushing game. And I plotted the 51 Nagy games on that 2x2 matrix. And in the upper right-hand corner, which is where a game that you would have exceeded the averages of both, 7 out of 51 were these really good games. On the lower left, which is the bad end of it, which is where he couldn't hit 120 rushing yards or 240 passing yards. Right. So it's just a bad game. He had 20 of the 51 were terrible games. Right. And then it gets worse when you just flip it on its side. Running games, 23 out of 51, he was above average. 28 out of 51 is below. Not good, but like it's not like the worst. Like it's below the middle line, but it's like, it's bad, right? It's like a C- D+ kind of thing. Passing games, 15 out of 51 of his games were below the 240 mark. I mean, that is an F. That is terrible. That is failing. And this is a guy who is an offensive coach, is an offensive head coach. It's completely unacceptable. And there is the point is we try to be balanced in the approach and give players, give coaches, give GMs enough time to say like, hey, this is what they do well. We're not going to judge off of one season, one game, whatever. Like we want to judge them over their body of work. We have a body of work. The results are in. They are terrible. And this is what happens when you bring a guy like this back. But now you're talking about messing with the most valuable athlete in Chicago right now, who everybody has bought into. Like this guy has, a 99.9% approval rating, right? Like, because nothing's 100, but everybody loves this kid. Everybody loves Justin Fields. So you're messing with the most valuable thing in Chicago. And that's, I'm excited to see him. I'm excited to see Justin Fields. I'm excited to see Akeem Hicks. I'm excited to see Khalil Mack play a football game, a winnable football game against a talent, a team that lacks a lot of talent, right? This is a team that's resetting in the Lions. So from a talent perspective, the Bears should be able to win this game. But Nagy has to get out of his own way if this offense has any chance of succeeding.
Yeah, and everybody hoped that the impromptu press conference today. Again, we're recording on a Wednesday. Was going to be him coming out and saying, okay, mea culpa, I get it. I'm going to turn it over to Bill Lazor, who had success last year. It may take a couple weeks, but we're going to see improvement. Like, I'm going to do what's necessary for the good of the Chicago Bears. And instead, he came out and said, no, it's an internal matter. We're not going to say who's in charge, which was such a miss. And it just, again, speaks to me that the ego is still there. He still believes he's extremely good at this when everything, all the objective data says he's not really good at this. In fact, he's well below average most of the time. That's a handicap for your team. I don't care what kind of talent you have. If you are going to come out and be unable to meet those league averages on average or below, right, or only meet those league averages a third or a quarter of the time, you're starting behind the eight ball every game. Everything has to go right. You have to get turnovers. You have to limit possession. Like, everything has to go right. And obviously that's not been happening. And that's reflected in the Bears record. So he really needed to show some culpability. He really needed to show some honestness, some honest approach, some self-awareness. And he didn't show any of it. And that gives me not zero hope going forward, but my hope is now twisted into something pessimistic, which is he's going to continue to drive this into the ground. And then everybody's going to go, that's it, get him out, right? Because the Bears don't fire coaches midseason. They never have. They're going to fire him at the end of the year if they fire him. And if he's going to stack performances like this, I was going to say it won't be hard. I'm going to say it shouldn't be hard to, at that point, make a fair assessment that the only way to win is to get this guy gone because he won't let go of the reins.
Yeah, well, let's talk about a couple of things other than that, because that
I would love to.
Yeah, all right.
Great.
So one of the things that I would really like to see on Sunday is that these wide receivers try to make something happen. And I know that the scheme has not put them in the best positions to succeed. I'm still really irritated with Marquise Goodwin for not coming back to that ball, just stopping his route and allowing that to be broken up. But these wide receivers have to step up. They have to start doing something. The three games, we're not even talking about the Cleveland game was, the one that everybody's talking about. 3 terrible game plans to start the year. I mean, or non-existent game plans. Like, they've been all bad. And it was masked in the second game against the Bengals because the defense took over and won the game. Yeah. And that, I mean, it's Bears football. That happens. But we have 0 explosive plays from this passing offense in 3 games. 0 in 3 games. Like, it is unbelievable. There is just absolutely nothing happening. And some of that's wide receivers. Like, they're not running the routes. I get a scheme, blah, 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 but they've had opportunities. They've had the ball in their hands to have explosive plays, and they're not getting it done. And so these guys have to step up too. They have to help out their young quarterback. These things snowball. Like, you could see that it just sort of unraveled for Fields when it wasn't working. And, that fourth quarter was painful to watch because it was just him just kind of running into a brick wall. But these wide receivers have to make some plays here. So I'm kind of challenging, putting that out in the universe and challenging those wide receivers to step up, help their young quarterback make some plays.
Yeah, and it's not a bad week to have to do that. We just talked with Ken about the lack of corners, the fact that Okudah, who was their top pick and a extremely talented corner in college, had a really rough rookie year. It was more on the coaching staff. Obviously didn't mesh with them and by all accounts received very little coaching. Looked like he was improving and coming back. That made me feel good because I looked at Jeff Okudah as a prospect and said, whew, he's really good. He blows his Achilles out. He's gone. And so they're going against an undermanned secondary. They should have some opportunity for separation. They're not going against world beaters in the Detroit secondary. Now, you have to pair that with a little bit of protection as a former offensive lineman. You know this, right? If you're giving Fields, like I counted on some of his sacks, I timed them just watching the replay on full speed. And yeah, it was 2.5 to 2.6 seconds until he got touched. But for the full second before that happened, he knew that touch was coming. I mean, the influence of that guy walking backwards towards you and Myles Garrett reaching over him, it's coming. You see that out of the corner of your eye or straight out of your eyes if you're turned to that direction. So that means you have 1.6 seconds to make a decision, right? There's not a lot of routes that are fully developed at 1.6 seconds, like a 3-yard slant, like that might be fully, at a point where you can throw it at 1.6 seconds. But if you look at time to throw, or time to release more specifically, very few quarterbacks in the NFL are hitting 1.6, and I'm talking about the Bradys and the Aaron Rodgers of the world. It takes
you're
a little
taking
bit
the
longer.
snap and throwing it. Like there's
Yeah,
no
like
right.
immediately, and if there's
Right.
no separation. So separation's one thing, a little bit of protection to go with it. That means some mixed protections. It doesn't have to, it's not about 5-man, it's about being effective, right? So if you need to pull somebody in to change it up, if you need to roll it out, if you need to run some RPO to get them thinking about the fact that, hey, Montgomery's gashed us a couple of times, to just make them hesitate, to get that, quarter second, half second window where you can throw. Again, fairly short games. I'm not looking for 7-step drops and 50-yard bombs. Be great, but I'm not expecting that after last week. It needs to work in concert, and everybody needs to play a little bit better. Yes, starting with the wide receivers, but the O-line has got to be not what it was on Sunday, because, oh boy,
I don't think I've seen a worse game from an offensive line.
It
And I mean, like,
really
it
looked like
wasn't
a high school game that was just had
where like you've got
no
like a
offensive
2A
line
team
coach.
that for some reason is playing the 4A team, and
Yep.
it's just like mismatch of talent level. It was the scheme didn't help things. Like they never chipped Garrett, they never gave Peters any help. They never, there just wasn't a lot of scheme help either. But even saying that, nobody on that line had a redeemable game. Like
No.
I mean,
Nobody
like,
was
everywhere
winning
I
the one-on-ones.
looked, it was just horror show.
Yeah.
The whole time. And
Jailbreak.
it wasn't like one guy beat an offensive lineman on one play and then the next play. No, it was like there were 3 guys. There was a picture from where 3 Bears offensive linemen are looking at Fields on the ground, and there's 3 Browns all around him, and it's like there was some other stuff like where a Browns player was helping Fields. I think it was Garrett, like helping him up after a sack. It's like even Garrett started to feel bad for Fields at some point, right? No, this was the worst offensive line performance I think I've just ever seen in an NFL game. Those guys have to bounce back. Like they're going to see that on film. They're getting beat up all week about that performance. They have to bounce back. They have to have pride in their game. This is not the Cleveland Browns. They should have an opportunity to do that. But hopefully it's also a wake-up call to say, let's give these guys some help when they need it.
Yeah, and let's let them run block a little bit, right? As an offensive lineman,
start going downhill.
If you're just absorbing punishment, if you're just going backwards all game, that's tiresome, right? Because when you make a mistake, it's going to be highly publicized. That's a sack, right? You miss a run block, okay, maybe you get 3 yards instead of the 5 or 7 you should have, right? But it's not so bad, and you're getting to deal the punishment, right? My other podcast partner made the point last night that run blocking recharges an offensive line, right? I get to go light into this guy. It just changes the dynamic. I'm not taking, I'm now giving, right? And it starts to roll, and you get to start to hopefully impose your will, move some people around. That's what gets offensive linemen charged up. You say, hey, for the next 50 snaps, I'm going to make you go backwards and just have guys pound into your chest. It's not good. So they are going to have to get back to some of that. I'm just going to call it magic, because over the last 2 weeks, we haven't seen it. But that first week against LA, great defensive line. Nobody expected him to do well. David Montgomery ran really well in that game. And everybody was like, wow, check it out. Again, a little bit of first week jitters and adjustment. But since then, like terrible, right? No openings, no rushing success. So let's get back to that again. We're not going against the Cleveland Browns. You should have some opportunities to open some holes, get some rolls going, get those guys going forward. And then if you want them to say, hey, we're going to go to some RPO game, half of you get to run block, half of you get to pass block, it's going to be a little bit more balanced.
Yeah, as an offensive lineman way back when, I always liked the pass blocking. It was kind of fun, right? Like from a technique wise, I liked it. I loved run blocking.
Yeah.
Right. I loved just firing off because the snap count, and it's you pushing somebody off of that spot. That's the point. And there's something like if you are an offensive lineman and you have made it all the way to the professional level, that is almost something that you love. You have to love. That's why you keep doing it. It's not a reward, okay, fine. Financially at the professional level, sure, it's fine. But like, it's not like you're doing it for front page headlines, right? You're not a running back, you're not a quarterback, you're not a wide receiver. You have to have this weird love of just like, I am going to push you off your spot. And that's why you keep coming back, because it's fun. Like if you're able to do that, particularly if you happen to be going against a guy that's bigger than you, that you get the right technique and you start pushing him back, like that is fun. And you get him on the ground, man. Like, I mean, you're really talking about that for, did you see that block that I made? Everybody's like, no, I don't watch the line, but that's, film room's fun. Yeah, know, and your buddies know.
You start to get a little bit of duo on the inside, right? You start working with your line mates and feeling like we're supporting each other. And you start pushing some of those high round tackles that the Detroit Lions have inside around, because look, Onwuzurike is a great player. But he is more of that fire through type of player. He is more of that penetrator, and he's not unfamiliar with double teams, because in the scheme he played at UW, they kind of misused him in a 3-man line, and he saw a lot of double teams. And a guy like that's really going to excel if you can get him one-on-one or get him in a single gap type system. So he can hold up, but if you start moving that guy, you get 2 guys on him and you start moving him and Montgomery goes through his gap, that's the kind of thing that the Bears could have some build. And it's not negative plays, right? It's all about how many plays on the play sheet. Do we have negatives? Do we have positives? And I'll take the 3.5 yard runs against Detroit if you're moving them, if you're imposing your will, if Montgomery's beating into guys and running like a, water buffalo that's about to get pulled down like he always does. I'll take that, because it's not sacks. It's not tackles for losses, right? It does build that, hey, we've got some positive momentum here. And I think it's so critical that the Bears get on that roll early and are able to sort of push that through.
Yeah. And on the other side of the ball, I mean, it feels like this defense is coming together a little bit. I thought they played pretty well. They got worn down. Cleveland's a good offense. I mean, we certainly talked about that last week, and they're really good at running the ball. That's what we're talking about, right? Like eventually, over time, they just sort of imposed their will, and eventually that defense got worn out. I mean, the time of possession differential was crazy. I think on defense, though, this is Jared Goff, right? Like this is not a guy that you're particularly worried about. You've played him well in the past. The key to beating Jared Goff is take the ball away from him. He'll give it to you.
When he throws it, catch it.
He's gonna give you opportunities, and so you're probably going. This is old school Bears football, or at least old school to us, right? Where Bears defense is probably going to have to find a way to put the offense in favorable positions. If they can get one in the end zone, that's going to help a lot. If it's the end zone that I'm sitting in, that'll be even better. But, if Roquan wants to throw the ball up to me, like whatever, right? Like,
whatever.
Just so happened, No,
I think lost in last week's absolute drubbing on the offensive side is that the Bears played brilliantly on defense. Like Sean Desai's defense played really, really well. They just lost when they got worn out. Like this game was tight. This is a 1-score game, largely.
No defense can hold up that long, right? Like that's the
but
point.
They held up a long time versus again what we said was what is a really good offense. One of the best offensive lines in the league. Baker's playing well. Their running back stable, super well chronicled. Yeah, they were down on some wide receiver talent, but they weren't bereft at the wide receiver position. And that game was sub 10 points, like for a long time. Did never feel like that because the offense had no shot, but the defense held up their end of the bargain well into the third quarter. That game was extremely winnable. Then they just tired out, time of possession differential, they wore down, and that was the end of it. But through 3 quarters, like Desai's defense played as well as it has all season. If they do that against a less talented Lions squad, it's going to help give the ball back to Justin Fields and hopefully an offense that can do something with it.
Yeah, back-to-back good performances. The Bengals bounced back and they looked good in week 3. They won their game. And so you hope that week 1 against the buzzsaw that is the Rams, like
for sure.
This was not hyperbole when I was like, I think the Rams are probably going to be in the NFC Championship game. Yep. They've got a really good chance to be in the Super Bowl. Like this is the team that I was most worried about, and the Bears have to start on the road against LA, against a team that's just so excited to like play with a new toy in Matthew Stafford. So if Sean Desai learned a lot from that game and then can kind of move on and put that behind him. And this defense can again lead this team. Maybe we will get that like better defensive performance that we've been looking for. So let's leave it there. Let's circle back to the beers, or the drinks, since I didn't bring a beer on. I mean, all right. I don't know if anybody's going to run out and buy a bottle of Bronca Menta. This Mr. Black coffee liqueur. You might have a local one that you like. I bought this online and they delivered it to my house. That was kind of cool. So it's like an Australia, owned company.
Product of Australia.
Cool. But like I think they have a place here in the U.S. that'll ship it. And I mean, it's good. I'm still learning how to use it. But if you combine that with something like what I did with the Bronca Menta, and then I put a little kick in it, I mean, this is a good drink. This is fun.
I'm all for it. I like everything in it. Like I like mint. I like bourbon. Like coffee. Like a little bit of creamer.
Well, I knew you'd like the coffee drink, so I figured that was an easy sell.
It sounds good. So if we meet up, I'm definitely going to have you make me one.
Sure.
The Ridgetop Red, one of my favorites locally. It's got a really nice balance. It does. If you like reds, it does have that deep red color. It's got a little bit of caramely flavor to it, but it also has that little bite of a red. It's really well balanced, crafted. Not a ton of alcohol. I think it's 5 something or 6 something by volume. So, a good solid microbrew, but not something that's going to put you under the weather if you drink, a couple while you're sitting around the campfire. It's just a really solid beer. So I did the play on words with feeling red or seeing red about Nagy's performance, but I just like drinking Ridgetop Red. It's good stuff.
Well, we've got awesome stuff going on, but like one thing we want to talk about is the YouTube page. So we're recording these this season. We're throwing these up on YouTube, also throwing up the other podcasts that I'm doing with Lester Wiltfong, which is the Bear and Balance. So you can find those if you're a YouTube fan. Even if you're not a YouTube fan, it'd be cool if you went there and just subscribed, because that's helps us out. We hear a lot like, how can we help you out? How can we support you? That's one thing. Obviously, reviewing the podcast, Windy City Gridiron podcast, or going on and giving favorable reviews on the YouTube page. The other thing is we will have this Patreon set up here in the very near future. EJ and I are going to finalize the final details tonight after we record. So by the time that you hear this, it will be ready to go, and we will be rocking and rolling on the Patreon. So if you are interested in that, again, many thank yous in advance. That is really cool for considering even doing that. But we will have that ready to go, and we are excited for some of the stuff that we have planned for that. We've been talking about how we're going to support that Patreon. We are really excited to engage with you guys on that level. So be looking for that. And EJ, what else do you got going on?
Bootleg will definitely be out by the time that this podcast lands. This one's going on. Patreon also going up for the Bootleg site, so it's a big Patreon week. A lot of development there, but anybody that's considering that on either front, I'll just echo what JB said. The idea that anybody would even consider that, to me, is still sort of head spinning, and I can't thank folks enough for saying what you do is valuable enough to me that I want to support it monetarily, financially. That's just a great thing. So those are the big ones. Other than that, it's going ahead. We're in the middle of the season. Great games are rolling off. We're going to do a bootleg live stream on Saturday. We're going to have hopefully a very nice guest. We're really close to finalizing that. We're just not saying who it is in case they have to back out. Very busy person, but somebody, if you're into draft stuff, or if you knew who Math Bomb was, you will be interested in this guest. So we'll have details about that. Check them out on Twitter. I'll probably put a notice up on the Bootleg page. But like Jeff said, like the podcast, review the podcast wherever you listen to it. If you check it out on YouTube, absolutely subscribe. It's free, and it helps us with the algorithm, helps us get seen, helps us be able to build more content. Is really what it comes down to. So can't thank you enough for all that support, no matter how you listen, watch, engage. Really glad to have you along, and there's more coming.